Hi, I'm Andy. I'm one of the co-founders here at Moddable, and I'm shooting this webinar today to get you started using the Moddable SDK on both the desktop, using the simulator, and on the ESP8266. So we're going to walk through how to download, build, and run the tools from Moddable, how to download and install the SDK and toolkit that you need to run on the ESP8266, and then we're going to show you how to kind of tie those things together by running in the simulator on your desktop and running applications to the ESP8266. So we're going to start our adventure by just going to moddable.com here. And you can see on moddable.com that there's a link in the top right, Moddable on GitHub. I'm going to click that, and that's going to take us over to our GitHub open source repository. If we scroll down, there's a lot of good information on here. But what we're looking for is the Getting Started guide. So I'm going to click this Getting Started document, step-by-step instructions. And that's going to help us download and install and build all of the tools. So I'm building today for Mac OS. If you're working on Windows or Linux, you should follow the appropriate instructions for those environments. But for me, I'm going to go down here to Mac OS. I already have Xcode and the command line tools installed and ready to go. If you don't skip that step. Go into the App Store and get all of that stuff set up. But I'm going to start with step 2 here and create a directory in my home directory. So here I am at home, and I'm going to make a directory, and I'm going to call it webinar. I'm going to go into the webinar directory, and I, from there, can clone our open source repository. So I'm going to grab that git clone command, and I'm going to run it over here in the webinar directory, and that's going to pull down everything you need to get started. If you don't already have Git installed, you can do that separately. There are instructions all over the web on how to do that. This kind of assumes that you already have Git up and running. So now I've got my repository right there, Moddable. And to make everything kind of work smoothly, we need to do a couple of changes to our host environment. So we need a couple of different environment variables. The instructions here say to put those in your .profile file that runs every time you open up a new terminal. In my case, I run the bash profile, or so the bash shell, which a lot of people on OS X do. So you'll want to, if you're in that situation, edit instead the .bash profile in your home directory. So I'm going to change my username, and then this, in my case, is not projects, it's webinar. Okay. Save that, source that, so that what we put in there takes effect immediately instead of having to start a new terminal. Now I can go to the Moddable directory, and there we are, webinar Moddable. Then I can go to build, makefiles Mac. We're just following this instruction right here, and just type make. And that's going to build for you the command line tools, the simulator, and the debugger for Mac. Okay, so now my tools are all built and installed. And I just need to verify that everything works. So if we go back to the document here, we see that step 6 is to try opening up XSBug. That's the Moddable SDK's debugger. So I'm going to copy and paste that in here. And indeed, we get XSBug up and running. And you can see here that it came up with the source code for the Hello World app. And we're actually going to build that next, just to make sure that everything is working as expected. But it's worth looking and seeing what this app actually does. So as you can see, it's got this debugger statement that just breaks here into XSBug, and then it traces one line hello world sample out to the console. So how do we do that build? Well, we go back to our instructions, and we're going to go into the Moddable examples hello world directory, and then we're going to run this command, mcconfig-d-m-p mac. The D says that it should be a debug build, the M tells it to go ahead and complete the build, and the P is the platform identifier, so it tells it to build for the Mac as opposed to the ESP8266 or the ESP32, one of the other platforms that we can build for. So I'm going to do that. We'll see, it'll take just a second to actually build the app. And then it will run it in the Moddable simulator. So you can see we broke into excess bug. We have our simulator up and running in the background. But here we are with our debugger statement. We can flip open things here, see what modules are loaded, global variables, things like that. We can step, and if we step up here enough, we'll eventually get our trace. And so there you go, proof that our application actually ran. Again, we can look here and see that it's running in the simulator, but there's nothing on the screen here. So what if we wanted to show something a little bit more interesting than just a black screen on our simulator? We could do that real quick. So we'll just close the simulator, we'll go back to our command line, and we're going to try just a slightly more interesting example. We'll go into the PIU directory, PIU, and then balls, and we will run an mcconfig-d-m-pmac here. And after this build, you will see a little bit of the actual user interface and graphics work that the Moddable SDK can do. Here are bouncing balls running in the simulator on the Mac. So now we're all set up on the Mac. We've got the simulator running, we have built tools, and we've got kind of the whole SDK and runtime ready to go here on the Mac. Next, we're going to talk about how to actually deploy onto a physical device. So to start with, we're going to work with the ESP8266. If you have one of these at home, you probably have it in the form of some sort of dev kit, be that a Node MCU board or one of the other mini ESP8266 based kits. We also happen to, at Moddable, sell something that we call the Moddable Zero, which is a ESP8266 with a resistive touchscreen attached to it. If you have one of those, or you have your own screen wired to an ESP8266 in the same way, you can follow along and do all of the examples that use the screen. But if not, you can still, with just a kind of base ESP, do a lot of the command line and text-based examples. So we'll walk through some of both, and you work with what you've got. So we're going to go back over to our instructions here. And we're going to jump down to the ESP8266 Moddable Zero setup instructions. We just completed the host environment setup for macOS successfully. And now we're going to go to this next bit. We're going to go make the ESP directory in our home directory. So back to terminal. I'm going to go home and I'm going to make an ESP directory and go into it. And the first step we've got is to download and install the Silicon Lab driver. So this is a VCP driver. It creates a virtual COM port on your computer that makes the ESP8266 plugged in via USB look like a COM port from the perspective of your operating system. So I'm going to click that. We're going to come over here and we're going to download this. If you've got Windows, you want that one. If you are on Linux, you want that one. I am not. I'm on Mac, so I'm going to grab this one right here. I'm going to open it. Okay. And I'm just going to go ahead and mount this disk image that came with the driver. Terms of service, that's very important. And then come in here, and in the disk image, it'll mount up here. And you can see that we just have an option to install the package for the VCP driver. So I'm just going to do that. And it'll come here, continue, agree. Sometimes people have had problems with this installing on weird backup disks or other USB drives that you have installed in your computer. So if you've got any issues there, just make sure Macintosh HD is selected here. Then install. Hey. And now it's successfully installed. So we can just close that. We can move the installer to the trash, that's fine. And we should be good to go. We'll be able to test it in a minute. Okay, so now back to our instructions. And we can see that step 4 is to download the ESP tool. So same sort of deal, I'm going to go grab that from GitHub, save it. Open it. You may need a special third-party tool to open that file. It's a TGZ. If so, you can find appropriate tools on the macOS App Store. So I'm going to go into there. I'm going to grab just this one file called ESP tool. This is a little tricky, so you got to be sure you do this part right. So I'm going to go into my home directory and then into ESP, and I'm going to make a new folder called ESP tool, and I'm going to put just that single file, ESP tool, into there. There we go. And so that's how you get the ESP tool installed in the right place. Okay, so our next step is to download the GCC toolchain for the Extensa architecture that's used on the ESP8266. So I'm going to, once again, just download that big TGZ and open it using Archive utility. And when that's done, we will just take this toolchain directory and put that whole thing in our ESP directory. So there's that one. And now we also need the ESP8266 core for Arduino. That is another full repository. So again, big zip file this time. You can go and download that. And all of these links are just right there in the Getting Started guide. So just kind of walk through them one at a time. No big deal. Okay, and then when I've got my ESP8266-230 directory, I'm going to take that and just drop it in the ESP folder also. Okay, now one last step. We need to clone the ESP8266 SDK, which is the actual RTOS that hosts the ESP8266 environment, into our ESP directory. So this one we can do directly from the command line. So we're going to go back over to our terminal. We're in our ESP directory, and we're going to do this git clone of the ESP8266 RTOS. That will take a minute. Okay, and when that is done, we need a specific version. We need version 3.0 release candidate 1. So we're going to go into that RTOS directory that we just downloaded, that we just cloned, and then we're going to check out this specific tag so that we have the exact version of it that works best with the Moddable SDK. And there you go. We're all set there. And now we can try actually plugging in our little ESP8266. So, cable goes there. Cable goes into a USB port. And we can go try running Hello World again. So I'm going to go back to the Moddable examples Hello World directory, and we're going to use that same ncconfig command that we used before, dmp, but this time we're going to say p-esp because we're building for the ESP platform. This will take a minute the first time because it has to kind of build in all the ESP8266 RTOS stuff. So give it a minute. And when we get to this step, you'll see that if everything went right with installing your drivers and everything else, it'll detect the device and it'll start flashing to the device. These dots going across here means that everything worked correctly. And here we are. Like magic, we are running in XSBug on the ESP8266. This is a step where people sometimes have some difficulties. The Silicon Labs VCP driver can be a little tiny bit finicky. If you get to that build and it doesn't work, first step is probably just to try rebooting your computer to make sure that the driver had an opportunity to load. And then if you still have some issues, depending on the version of Mac OS that you're running or on Windows or Linux, there can be conflicts between different drivers. So if you are finding that you can't get the device to detect when you plug it into the computer, just Google FTDI Silicon Labs VCP driver and your operating system and look at different tips. And if you still can't sort out how to get it working, just open an issue on GitHub with us and we'll help walk you through it. But anyway, now we are back in XSBug, but instead of running in the simulator on our desktop, we're running on the ESP8266. So just as before, we could hit play here and we'll get our traceback hello world sample, but it's actually running on the device now instead of on the desktop. So if you have a Moddable 0 or you have a ESP8266 that you've wired a screen to that is the same type of screen as is used on the Moddable 0, you can also go and do a graphics example. So same as before, we're going to come down here, we're going to go into Pew, we're going to go into Balls, and here there's just one little trick. When we run mcconfig, we're going to say not just ESP, but ESP/Moddable 0, which tells it to configure all the pins and everything in the way that they are on the Moddable 0, so that we get all of the display and the touch working correctly. So I'm going to run that, it'll build, and deploy. And just like before, we have bouncing balls running using our user interface framework, but instead of being on the simulator, now it's running on the device. All right, so now that you're all up and running and you have balls going on the ESP8266, you basically can run any other example that we have in our repository. So real quickly, I just want to kind of walk you through the basic structure of our examples and show you where you can go next if you want to learn more. So back up here in our repository, we're going to go to the Moddable directory and then into the examples folder. And if you scroll down here on GitHub, you can see that there's a README document for the examples folder. And this tells you all about both how to build apps, so the different kind of command line options for mcconfig and the different things that you can do there for debugging and instrumentation and for your build on every different platform. You can learn about the different pixel formats and the screen rotations that we support in our examples, and also how to configure Wi-Fi for the networking examples that you'll run into later. So that's all there in the README. And then the cool thing about our examples is that they're kind of divided up into a bunch of different subcategories. So Pew is our kind of highest level user interface framework that you can use to build graphics apps that have touch and kind of full functionality. Those are here in the Pew directory. There are networking examples in network. That includes both Wi-Fi, cloud services, and BLE examples if you're running on the ESP32 that has a BLE radio. all sorts of different things you can check out here. And we're going to do another video that'll be kind of right next to this one that's going to go in depth on the different examples and show you all sorts of different things running on both the ESP8266 and the ESP32. So we'll do that next time. Thank you.